The next part of the gripper assembly that we're going to create is the claw. The claw is the part that actually grabs onto the can. It's a small assembly. It consists of two parts. Let's look at the claw finger first of all the way from the extrusion all the way down to a rectangular pattern. Moving the end of part up, let's have a look at the extrusion. I'm editing that sketch. Now this is my sketch. I encourage you to create your own design. I have these two lines collinear. Keep in mind we also have some hole centers for the linkages that will be coming a little later on. Let's finish that sketch and move on to the next part. In this case I've created a sketch, and this sketch is on the top face of that first extrusion. Turning on the visibility, the idea here is that I'm removing weight from the part. So I've got a large number of areas that I'm going to be taking out. Now I'm sharing that sketch because the depth of these extrusions are different. So my first extrusion is a fair bit deeper than the second one that's coming along. And the major reason for that is to remove weight and material. There's the second extrusion. And that's in and around those holes for the linkages. I want to mirror these extrusions, so I'm creating a work plane. Having created the work plane, I can then mirror the extrusions onto the bottom side of that claw. And there you can see those. I then create another sketch where I can model an extrusion, and this is where the second part of the claw assembly will be added. So I made that sketch and I've added a dimension of 0.152 inches. Keep in mind there are metric equivalents available to you as well. With that extrusion created, I wanted to actually drop the level just a little bit because you'll see how we assemble this later on. So I've cut a little bit off the top face there. I also need to mirror that extrusion onto the bottom face. We'll move the end of part down, and you can see that that mirror feature adds that little notch both top and bottom. And again, we'll see that just a little later on as to why I have created that. The next extrusion was created to remove material from the part. I need to do this so that I can add an area where the linkages will be able to move around. The sketch is in the center of the part. Here we see that sketch. And what I'm going to do then is use an extrude cut and a mid-plane option on that. Now what we can do is press the function 7 key, and that's the slice graphics, which shows you that a lot more clearly. And there you can see the sketch that I created to remove that material. Let's move the end of part down again, and we'll see that that material has been removed. Now when I created my sketch, I used some straight lines at this far end. It's just a rectangular when I created it. I need to round that off, so I used a fillet. Now the particular fillet that I used was the full round. This option requires the selection of 3 faces, and once you select the faces, the radius is selected automatically for you based on those selections. I'm going to add 2 holes in now, and those are the holes where the pins will be placed for the linkages, and that will allow the motion of the claw finger. Let's turn off the visibility of a couple of sketches and that work plane, so we can see the rest of the process just a little more clearly. And finally, the work plane. To complete this, I'm going to add a sketch, and this sketch is going to be where the path of the holes will be for the rectangular pattern. So the sketch, I've based that on a certain dimension. I'm creating a hole which is going to be 0.78 in diameter. So I've offset that half of that distance so the holes are tangential to those arcs and lines. I then created the first hole, and that's a distance of 0.098 in my design from the end. And what I want to do is create a pattern of those holes equally spaced. Well, how do I do that along a line? Well, there's a very clever way to do that using the rectangular pattern command. There you can see the end result. Let me show you how I did that. So I started by going to the rectangular pattern command, selecting the hole that I want to make a pattern of. I have to determine my direction, in this case just a single direction. That looks good. And now what I want to do is determine the number of holes. I know I want about 15 holes. With the value of 15 input, we can see that it's not even close to being correct. So I need to fix that by selecting the curve length from that list. That's starting to look a lot better, but it's still not correct. It's not the correct length, and those holes are bumping into that face. I can fix that quite easily by changing the start point to be the center of the first hole. And you can see that that fixed any problems related to that pattern. Click on OK, and there's the pattern of holes along a line, in this case what we call the curve length. Let me undo that. I already had created one before, and move the end of part down. So the claw is now finished. Let me turn off the visibility of that sketch. This is an interesting part to model with a few challenges along the way.